Count Dracula, the Prince of Darkness, the Shapeshifter, the blood-sucking movie monster, the vampire. We are all familiar with the many tropes adhering to the mythos of one of the world's most iconic boogeymen, the genesis of which began with 19th century Irish author Bram Stoker, who penned the acclaimed Dracula novel in 1897. The true inspiration many scholars of today would argue Stoker drew from was that of a 15th century Eastern European nobleman named Vlad Dracula III. Inheriting a tumultuous reign from his father of his ancestral lands of Wallachia, Prince Vlad gained the seat of a vassal state, wedged between the Islamic Ottoman Empire to the south and the Christian Hungarians to the north, both powerful in their own right and leveraging Wallachia as an advantageous buffer between them, as Ottoman Emperor Mehmed II expanded his empire at an unprecedented rate and threatened the status quo of Eastern European stability. When matters culminated in a heated war between Wallachia and the Ottomans, the ambitious Prince Vlad resorted to brutal guerrilla warfare, knowing that his army was outnumbered by the mighty Ottoman forces, and as the casualties mounted and the war dragged on, tempers flared and the fighting grew more savage. But once Mehmed led his forces to the gates of Wallachia's capital city, Târgoviște, he and his army were met with a gruesome sight, one only the apocalyptic plains of hell itself could possibly match. It would later come to be known by many names, one of which being the Forest of Corpses, a true horror in history. Vlad Tepes, despite his noble standing, did not have an easy childhood. When his father, Vlad II, refused to support the Ottoman invasion of Transylvania in 1442, Vlad, his father, and his younger brother Radu were all summoned before Sultan Murad II to confirm their loyalty. Upon arriving, 11-year-old Vlad was imprisoned along with his father and brother. After a year, Vlad II was released by the Sultan, though his sons were withheld by the Ottomans as collateral, should their father decide to once again turn his back on the empire. During their captivity, the young princes were educated by Ottoman standards. They were trained in war and bureaucracies alike, in an attempt to groom the boys into continuing their support and subservience to Ottoman rule, should they gain political standing. And while Vlad's younger brother Radu found it easier to settle into a life with the Ottomans, Vlad remained apprehensive. Even after he gained his freedom following his father's payment of tribute to the Sultan around 1447, the prince's opportunistic nature would have him weave his own designs for his political future. When his father and older brother Mircea fell in battle following a Hungarian invasion of Wallachia, Vlad knew he then had a legitimate claim to the throne. What would proceed was an exhausting fight for his place as Wallachia's ruler, as he took the crown, being subsequently deposed twice over his lifetime. During his second reign, Vlad consolidated his power, arresting and persecuting the Wallachian noblemen and their families who he believed were involved with the deaths of his father and older brother, or otherwise opposed his reign. They were all sentenced to execution. And while Vlad Tepes was a devout Christian, despite his upbringing amongst the Islamic Ottoman Turks, he was an especially cruel and brutal ruler. During his time with the Ottomans, Vlad witnessed the forms of capital punishment inflicted on criminals, including executions, his apparent favorite being that of impalement, which the Ottomans still often employed in an otherwise modernizing medieval world. An archaic, gruesome form of simultaneous torture and execution, impalement could either kill a victim quickly or provide one of the most slow and agonizing deaths known to man. Sharpening a long piece of timber, usually the circumference of a human arm, the timber would be greased and the point inserted in the victim's anal cavity, before it was hammered in deeper with mallets. If the sharpened point damaged vital internal organs, the victim would die almost instantly. But if an executioner was skilled enough with the method, they could maneuver the wooden stake within the body so as to avoid hitting any major organs, therefore keeping the victim alive as they were raised into an upright vertical position, some kept alive for several days as they slowly succumbed to their grisly fate. Thousands would meet their end in this manner at the orders of Vlad Tepes. His propensity for this barbaric form of punishment gained the attention of his contemporaries, who began to refer to him as Vlad the Impaler. By 1461, an embittered Vlad stopped paying the usual tributes to the Ottoman Sultan, now Murad's son, Mehmed II. Not forgetting the fact that the Ottomans had held him prisoner for much of his childhood and adolescent years, and unwilling to rule as a vassal pawn to the Turks, Vlad was essentially kicking a hornet's nest. Mehmed II, or as he would come to be known, Mehmed the Conqueror, was a powerful ruler and a genius military tactician. Having done the impossible in sacking the Roman city of Constantinople in 1453, a feat many before him failed time and time again to do when faced with the formidable defenses of the Roman Empire's last bastion. Having grown up with Vlad during his time in captivity, Mehmed was well acquainted with the prince, but upon hearing news that Vlad had stopped paying tribute, the Sultan felt betrayed and ordered Vlad be brought to him to confirm his loyalty, a familiar flashpoint of contention between the families, mirroring the ruler's fathers before them. But in secret, Mehmed ordered one of his commanders, Hamza Bey, to capture Vlad once he crossed the Danube River. However, both sides had many spies, and Vlad sprung a trap on Hamza Bey, in turn capturing him along with his men. In retaliation, Vlad and his army began razing Ottoman villages along the river, where tens of thousands are estimated to have been killed. When this news reached Mehmed, he assembled the largest force since his conquest of Constantinople, and rode for Wallachia, intending to replace Vlad on the throne with his younger brother, Radu. Vlad's time was a burgeoning age of military advancements, and the Ottomans were at the forefront of these innovations. They brought Constantinople to its knees, crumbling the city's impenetrable walls with devastating force from their large cannons, and now, Vlad faced this same firepower. Knowing he was outgunned and severely outmanned to Mehmed's massive army, Vlad made a tactical retreat deeper into Wallachia, taking a scorched earth approach, burning his own fields and villages to the ground, and evacuating his people to the mountains, along with poisoning the water sources, leaving nothing and no one to aid the Ottomans in their pursuit of him. Many hard battles would be fought over the next 2 weeks, with casualties mounting on both sides. Vlad led continuous guerrilla attacks on the Sultan's starving army, climaxing in a last-ditch effort by the Wallachian prince, wherein he attempted to assassinate Mehmed during a chaotic assault on the Ottomans' camp, the night of June 16, 1462. Entrenched just south of the Wallachian capital, Mehmed's army was blindsided by Vlad's attack, and the battle waged until dawn, later to be known as the night attack at Târgoviște. Vlad aimed to enter what he believed was the Sultan's tent and kill him there. However, he mistakenly entered the tent of Mehmed's advisors and made his retreat. Following the night attack and with Vlad and his forces once again in the wind, Mehmed's army found themselves starved, thirsty, and battle-weary. But being so close to the capital city of Târgoviște, the Sultan decided to march on and lay siege to Wallachia's center of power. However, on arrival, the Ottomans found the once bustling city a complete ghost town, its gates wide open and its streets emptied. Bewildered, Mehmed led his army out of the city and was met with a sight no one was prepared for. Exiting Târgoviște, the Ottomans beheld a forest of corpses, all impaled. Leonikos Chalkokindailis, a contemporary Greek historian, wrote of the grim display, describing estimates upward of more than 20,000 Ottoman men, women, and children skewered on stakes, stretching nearly for 2 miles. He goes on to recount how infants were tied to their mothers' breasts, and that the birds made their nests in the victims' entrails. The Turkish villages Vlad's army attacked in Ottoman territory were picked over for corpses and prisoners, so Vlad could orchestrate the gory spectacle, an indication of his merciless view on battle tactics, and a stark example of medieval psychological warfare at the hands of a calculating despot. Despite the overly cruel and inhumane nature of such an act, it has been argued that Vlad's corpse forest was not the product of evil rage against a Muslim people by a weakened Christian ruler, but instead, a carefully planned strike at the nerves of a much more powerful foe in Mehmed II. Mehmed, having spent much of his childhood with Vlad, knew the Wallachian was familiar with and duly proficient in the Ottomans' cultural practices. It's as though Vlad were presenting this fact to the Sultan in perhaps the most visceral showing possible, leaving the conqueror and his army with a field of his own people, impaled, rather than another city to take in a glorious siege, as he had so famously done with Constantinople. And upon a stake, raised highest amongst all others, Mehmed discovered his trusted commander, Hamza Bey, whom he dispatched weeks prior with orders to capture the prince. A final insult added to the crippling injury Vlad caused the pursuing Ottoman army. Mehmed and his forces were shocked and devastated by the macabre scene left by their adversary. Though despite his horror, the Greek historian YleArkisto noted a surprising amount of admiration the Sultan found for Vlad, stating, "The Sultan was seized with amazement and said that it was not possible to deprive of his country a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people, and he said that a man who had done such things was worth much." After bearing all that he could of the nightmarish sight, Mehmed the Conqueror turned his troops around and abandoned his chase of Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracula would ultimately escape Mehmed's clutches once again, fleeing into the Carpathian Mountains as his younger brother Radu was placed on the Wallachian throne with Ottoman soldiers, should the fallen prince seek revenge. Instead, arriving in Hungary in 1462, seeking support in taking back his throne, Vlad was detained, finding himself a prisoner in foreign lands a second time. He was in captivity for 14 years before being released when Radu's successor, Basarab Lyota, aligned with the Ottomans, and it was decided that Vlad should be lawful ruler of Wallachia to defend against the Turks. Though without any military backing from the Hungarian crown, it would be many bloody years of conflict and battles before Vlad was once again on the throne after driving out Basarab, who retreated to Ottoman territory. It was not long, however, before Basarab would return with an army supplied by Mehmed himself, clashing with Vlad's diminished forces, the aging prince finally falling in battle in the winter of 1476. Dracula's body was quartered and his head removed, being shipped directly to Mehmed in Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, where the Sultan ordered the prince's head displayed on a pike. It would be unfair to say that Vlad Dracula was a bloodthirsty tyrant set apart from his contemporaries. In his time, impalement and other morose acts of torture and execution were not uncommon amongst Europe's rulers of the Middle Ages, especially during times of war, which was rampant across the continent. And while Vlad's penchant for spitting his foes on stakes would make him particularly notorious, he was not necessarily seen as evil during his lifetime. Though ultimately, he was not remembered fondly for that matter. A hard ruler who seemed to prefer being feared most of all, Dracula ordered thousands to the stake, along with having others skinned, boiled, maimed, hanged, and burned, making it clear as to why he was noted as a particularly nasty figure. However, most people in Wallachia today, what is now present-day Romania, look back on Vlad Tepes as a national folk hero, despite his bloody reputation. Bram Stoker's iconic monster wasn't made known to the collective Romanian consciousness until the early 1990s. The Romanians appalled to hear of their ancestors' integral deformity by the Irish author in Western Hollywood. Most of Romania views Vlad Tepes as a Christian savior of the country, who stopped the further encroachment into their lands by a conquest Hungary Islamic Empire. And for that, Romanians are grateful and share a sense of pride over the otherwise merciless Vlad. Hero or villain, the 15th century Wallachian monarch's impact is undeniable. An impact that perhaps was most notably felt outside the walls of Târgoviște in June 1462, where a display of death and dread so vivid struck terror into the hearts of thousands and stopped one of the most powerful armies of the medieval world in its tracks, making Vlad the Impaler's forest of corpses a true horror in history. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching Horrors in History.